Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, the agenda is to deploy the PlayFab build onto PlayFab's dashboard and connect as a clients. So the steps we're going to be following for this are as follows. So the first thing we're going to do is actually deploy the server build as a Linux container to PlayFab. The second thing is we're going to create a startup script in our Unity game for a client. In the startup script, we're going to be logging into PlayFab, which I'm going to be showing you how to do as the client. In the success callback of the login script, we are going to request for a multiplayer server. And once we get back a multiplayer server, we're going to connect to that requested multiplayer server. So strap in and let's get started. So back in my PlayFab dashboard, I'm going to head over to my title that I created, which is PlayFab tutorial. And if I head over to multiplayer, it's going to prompt you here for your card details if you haven't inserted them already. But don't worry because you already have 750 free hours to start off and you're given these 750 free hours every month. Here you can see a button that says new build. I'm going to tap on this and there are a bunch of things here that you're to fill up so that you can actually have your game server running. Now, before we fill everything up, the main thing you should know here is under your server details, we've created a Linux container in the previous video. And you can see here that you can actually upload to container registry because it says here no containers found. So the way this process works is PlayFab gives you a username, a password, and a server URL to connect to, and you can upload your Linux container image onto the Azure Container Registry. Now to deploy your Linux container image, I'm going to be following this tutorial provided by Microsoft. So the main things you need here are actually WSL2 and a Linux distribution that uses WSL, so ideally Ubuntu. We already have Docker Desktop for Windows, which we used the last time around in the previous video. And the final steps would be to actually verify that WSL2 is set up correctly and also that Docker is set up correctly. Now, there are a bunch of tutorials on the internet to set up WSL2 as well as downloading a Linux distribution for it. So I'm going to leave it up to you to actually figure that out. But we're going to verify that this is actually set up correctly on my system. So in my PowerShell here, I'm just going to type these commands, which is given here. And you can see that I actually have WSL set up. Version is 2 and I have Ubuntu set up. The next thing I'm going to verify is this portion. So I'm going to open up WSL. And here I'm just going to type Docker version. And you can see here that it gives me back this information, which means I've set up Docker correctly for WSL. The final steps is as follows. So I click on upload to container registry and first I grab the server URL to which I'm going to connect to. Second, I'm going to navigate to my folder which has the game server build in my WSL terminal. Third, I'm going to do Docker login into my server URL and then enter the username and password. So for this, I'm just going to open Windows Terminal and create a new Ubuntu WSL version. The only reason I'm doing this and not opening WSL directly is because I can actually copy paste into this, which makes it easier for me. And you can see here it prompts me for my username and password, which I'm going to enter off stream. And you can see here after entering my username and password that it gives me a login succeeded, which means that I can now build my image into the Azure Container Registry. And for the final set of steps, we're going to do a Docker build, following which we're going to do a Docker push. A tag here isn't really necessary. So I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. So I'm going to call my build PlayFab test, and I'm going to use the tag, let's say v1 and say dot. So that's succeeded. Now finally, I'm going to do a Docker push. So I can get rid of this. And you can see here after the push that it was able to push these successfully onto the Azure Container Registry, right? And now if I head back into my browser and I refresh this, you can see that I actually have my container image here. I can use it and I can use the tag that I pushed, and that's pretty much it. So now I'm going to quickly create a new build. So I'm going to call my build name a PlayFab test build. I'm going to select DAS v4, Linux container, select my container image, set the tag which I gave. Now here, as I repeated before, you don't need a start command, nor do you need assets here, because your container image has everything. It has the game server build and it has the start command in your Docker file, so you don't need to specify anything here. I'm going to add the region as North Europe, and just for testing purposes, one standby, one and one Mac server. Port name, I'm just going to call it game port, and I'm going to set the port to 7777. The same way we did it when we set up the local testing agent. And that's pretty much it. So after I click on add build, you can see that it starts building. So it says build status initialized. Now we just wait until it goes from initialized to deployed, and we can actually connect to our server. So finally, we can see here after a few minutes that my PlayFab test build has been deployed as indicated by the status here. We're going to start off by creating a script called client startup. So the first step is actually going to be logging in as a client, and we're going to quickly write some code to handle that. So I'm going to import the missing references here, and I'm going to quickly define these callbacks. PlayFab grabs my title ID from the editor extension, which is why it's here in the shared settings file. And for custom ID, I've used systeminfo.device unique identifier, which, as you can read here, is unique for every device. Once I actually log in, you will see that a user is created in my PlayFab dashboard because I've set create account is equal to true. These are two callbacks that PlayFab expects, which handles the login event as well as the login error event. So I've added two simple print statements here to check if login is working as intended. I'm going to create a new game object here and call it client startup. And here I'm going to attach the script we just created. And now I'm going to hit play, and I'm expecting to see a success message here to confirm that I've logged in. And you can see here that I get a login success, which confirms that I was able to successfully log into PlayFab. Here I am in the player section of my PlayFab dashboard. If I click search here, you can see that it shows me my recently logged in player, which we just logged in with. So back in my editor, in my login success callback, I want to be able to call and request for a multiplayer server. So I'm going to quickly define a function called request multiplayer server. And I'm going to ensure that this function is called here. Now here in this function, I'm going to have this piece of code written. So essentially I'm creating a multiplayer server request object, which is required by PlayFab, and I'm calling it request data. Now the build ID is grabbed from here in the dashboard. So you can see here that the build ID has been listed here. The session ID can be anything. Now you have to strategize how you want your session IDs to be constructed. For now, I'm just using a random string generated by system.guid. But depending on what your strategy is that your organization chooses to use, you will have to figure out how to pass a unique session ID. And because my servers are now running on North Europe, my preferred regions is contains North Europe in the list of strings. And finally, I'm going to be calling the request multiplayer server, which passes the request data. And I'm also going to be describing these two callbacks, on request multiplayer server and if it errors out. I'm now going to be describing the callbacks. So you can see here I have when the request multiplayer server call succeeds, I want to be able to do something in this callback with the response. And if it errors out, then I just print out that an error has occurred. And here is where the response actually returns to me an IP and port that I can actually connect to using Mirror. And that will transition my server from standby state to active state. And then my client will be able to join. So here's a snippet that shows you exactly how that's done. So if there is no response, I can return out of this function. But the IPv4 address and the port itself is tied to the response. Now this is my network manager singleton instance. So I am setting the network address from the response. as well as the port on KCP transport to the response.num, right? So, or other response.ports of 0.num, which is the port that I need to connect to. And as soon as I've set the IP and port to what I need it to be, I can call start client, which automatically starts my client through the mirror instance. So there is one last thing we have to do before we actually get to the demo. So head over to title settings, and here within API features, just check allow client to start games and hit save. All right, we're finally ready to demo this. So I'm in the editor and I have my console open here. I'm going to hit play. And you can see here that I automatically connected into the game. So you can see PlayFab assigned an ID to me and a port to me. And you can see since I have my debug log enabled, it connects to this IP and port combination and it calls my on client connected callback. So everything works as intended. To verify this is actually working, you can see here that the network address is the IP that PlayFab gave me and the port is also the one that PlayFab gave me. So I'm connected to the game and I can connect with other clients as well to this game and it'll work perfectly fine. So that's about it for this video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen today. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and drop a subscribe. That'll help my channel out tremendously. Until next time, I'll see you guys soon.